On a crisp autumn morning in Portland, Oregon, Jennifer and David Anderson sat at their kitchen table, nervously reviewing resumes for potential babysitters. Their 3-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, needed full-time care while both parents worked demanding jobs at a local hospital. After weeks of searching, they finally found what seemed like the perfect candidate. Sarah Miller walked into their home that morning looking every bit the professional caregiver. Her shoulder-length brown hair was neatly styled, and she wore a modest blouse with pressed slacks. At 28 years old, she carried herself with confidence that immediately. "I've been working with children for over 8 years," Sarah explained, pulling out a carefully organized portfolio. "I have my CPR certification, first aid training, and excellent references from my previous families." She handed them several glowing recommendation letters, each one highlighting her exceptional childcare abilities and trustworthy nature. The twins, usually shy around strangers, took an immediate liking to Sarah. She got down on their level, speaking softly and showing them a small stuffed elephant she brought along. "This is Mr. Trunks," she told them, making the toy dance in the air. "He loves making new friends." Emma and Ethan giggled, their initial hesitation melting away as Sarah engaged them in playful conversation. Jennifer watched the interaction with growing relief. After interviewing 12 other candidates who didn't quite fit, Sarah seemed almost too good to be true. She had experience with multiple children, knowledge of developmental milestones, and even offered to help with light housework and meal preparation. "Your references speak very highly of you," David mentioned, scanning through the letters again. "Especially the Hamiltons from Seattle. They say you were with them for 3 years?" Sarah nodded, her expression softening with what appeared to be fond memories. "Yes, I was with them until they relocated to Europe for work. Their twins were about the same age as Emma and Ethan when I started. I still keep in touch with them through email." What the Andersons couldn't know, was that every word from Sarah's mouth was carefully crafted fiction. The reference letters were forgeries, created using real family names she'd researched online but had never actually worked for. Her credentials were fake, printed on high-quality paper using templates she perfected over years of deception. During that first meeting, Sarah demonstrated her knowledge of age-appropriate activities, discussed her philosophy on discipline, always gentle, never harsh, and shared her experience handling emergency situations. She spoke about the importance of routine and consistency, explaining how she would maintain the twins' current schedule while adding enriching activities to their day. "I believe in creating a safe, nurturing environment where children can learn through play," she explained, her voice warm and reassuring. "Every child develops at their own pace, and it's important to support their individual needs." The interview lasted 2 hours, during which Sarah masterfully played her role. She asked thoughtful questions about the twins' personalities, their favorite activities, and any specific concerns the parents might have. She took notes in a leather-bound planner, appearing organized and genuinely interested in providing the best care possible. Before leaving, Sarah made one final impression that sealed the deal. When Emma tripped and scraped her knee in the backyard, Sarah calmly cleaned and bandaged the wound, soothing the crying child with gentle words and a story about a brave little princess. Jennifer and David exchanged impressed looks. They had found their babysitter. "We'd love to have you join our family," Jennifer said warmly, walking Sarah to the door. "When can you start?" "I can begin next Monday," Sarah replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm looking forward to spending time with Emma and Ethan." As Sarah drove away from the Anderson home that afternoon, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. They had fallen for her act completely, just like the others before them. In her car's glove compartment lay a stack of similar forged references, each one crafted for different families in different cities. Portland was her 4th stop in 2 years, and the Andersons were perfect. Wealthy, busy parents who wanted the best for their children and wouldn't ask too many questions once they trusted her. Little did the Anderson family know that letting Sarah Miller into their lives would be the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt them for years to come. Their search for the perfect babysitter had led them straight into the hands of someone who had perfected the art of deception, and the consequences would be devastating. Over the next 6 months, Sarah Miller skillfully wove herself into the fabric of the Anderson family's daily life. Her manipulation was subtle, like a spider carefully spinning its web, as she worked to gain complete control over the household and isolate the twins from other caregivers. Sarah arrived early each morning, always perfectly put together and armed with creative activities for Emma and Ethan. She brought educational toys, planned themed craft projects, and took countless photos of the children's activities to share with Jennifer and David. The parents were delighted to see daily updates of their twins' finger painting, building block towers, or playing in the backyard. The children just adore her. Jennifer often told her colleagues at the hospital, "We're so lucky to have found someone who takes such good care of them." But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect arrangement, Sarah was methodically implementing her plan. It started with small suggestions. When the twins' grandmother would call to schedule her weekly visit, Sarah would mention that the children had been unusually tired lately and might need to rest instead. She began reporting that Emma and Ethan became upset after visits with their former playgroup friends, suggesting that perhaps they needed a break from those gatherings. "I've noticed they seem overwhelmed after too much social interaction," Sarah explained to Jennifer one evening. "Maybe we should focus on quieter, more structured activities at home for a while." Her voice carried just the right amount of professional concern, and her arguments always sounded reasonable. Sarah kept detailed notes about the children's daily routines, their likes and dislikes, and any small incidents that occurred. This attention to detail impressed the parents but also served another purpose. It allowed her to control the narrative of what happened during her hours with the twins. When the children's favorite aunt stopped by unexpectedly one afternoon, Sarah appeared flustered for the first time. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, locking the doorway. "We're in the middle of nap time, and they've been having such trouble sleeping lately. Perhaps we could schedule a visit for another time." The aunt left, disappointed, and Sarah made sure to tell Jennifer that the brief interruption had disrupted the entire day's schedule. One by one, Sarah created reasons why various visitors and activities weren't in the twins' best interest. She spoke about consistency and routine, using her supposed expertise to convince the parents that limiting outside influences would benefit their children's development. The Andersons, trusting her judgment and seeing how well behaved the twins seemed under her care, agreed to most of her suggestions. What they couldn't see was how Sarah behaved when they weren't around. While she never showed obvious cruelty to Emma and Ethan, she began using subtle psychological manipulation. She would lavish attention on one twin while ignoring the other, then switch her focus the next day. She told them stories about children whose parents worked too much and didn't love them enough, then immediately followed up with comfort and reassurance that she would always be there for them. "Your mommy and daddy are very busy people," she would say softly while brushing Emma's hair. "But you're lucky because you have me. I'll never be too busy for you." These quiet moments of manipulation were building a dangerous dependency that would soon become apparent. Sarah also began suggesting that the twins might have various developmental issues that required special attention that only she could provide. She spoke of sensitivity to certain foods, potential anxiety problems, and the need for extremely consistent routines. Each concern was presented with carefully selected articles and examples, making her arguments seem well-researched and professional. By the 6-month mark, Sarah had effectively reduced the twins' contact with anyone outside their immediate family. Their once busy social calendar was now carefully controlled and limited. Even their interaction with Jennifer and David was subtly manipulated, as Sarah would report that the children became upset or difficult after spending too much time with their parents on weekends. The Andersons didn't realize that their perfect babysitter was slowly creating an invisible wall between them and their children. They couldn't see how Sarah was positioning herself as the most important adult in the twins' lives, or how she was laying the groundwork for events that would soon shatter their family's peace. As winter approached, Sarah's grip on the household grew stronger, and the first cracks in her carefully constructed facade were about to appear. The nightmare was just beginning, and the worst was yet to come. The first signs that something was wrong began to appear in subtle ways. Jennifer noticed small bruises on Emma's arms one evening during bath time. When asked about them, Sarah had a perfectly reasonable explanation about the little girl falling while playing in the backyard. The story made sense, but something about it left Jennifer feeling uneasy. A week later, David spotted similar marks on Ethan's legs. Again, Sarah provided a detailed account of how the boy had stumbled while chasing his sister around the playroom. She even showed them an entry in her daily log documenting the incident, complete with times and what first aid she had applied. "Children this age are always getting little bumps and bruises," Sarah explained smoothly. showing them articles on her phone about normal childhood injuries. It's actually a good sign. It means they're active and developing their motor skills. Her voice carried the perfect blend of professional knowledge and caring concern. But the changes in the twins' behavior were harder to explain away. Emma, once outgoing and chatty, had become unusually quiet. She no longer ran to greet her parents when they came home from work, instead clinging to Sarah until the last possible moment. Ethan had started having nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night about the dark games. When Jennifer tried to discuss these changes with Sarah, the babysitter had an answer for everything. She suggested that Emma was going through a natural shy phase and that Ethan's nightmares were likely triggered by normal developmental fears. Each explanation was backed up by child psychology articles and parenting website printouts. "I've seen this many times before," Sarah would say, her voice gentle but firm. "The worst thing we can do is make too big a deal out of it. Children pick up on their parents' anxiety." She would then smoothly change the subject to the twins' latest art project or learning activity. The situation reached a turning point one evening when Jennifer came home early and found Emma hiding in her closet, trembling. When asked what was wrong, the little girl just shook her head and whispered, "I can't tell. It's a secret game." Alarmed, Jennifer questioned Sarah, who quickly explained that they had been playing hide and seek, and Emma had probably gotten too invested in staying hidden. "She has such a wonderful imagination," Sarah said with a warm smile. "We've been working on following game rules, and she's taking it very seriously." But later that night, when Jennifer tried to talk to Emma about the incident, the little girl burst into tears and refused to say anything more. When pressed, she would only repeat, "Sarah says we're not supposed to tell." David began noticing other troubling signs. The twins, who used to love their weekend family outings, now became anxious and upset when Sarah wasn't around. They would ask repeatedly when she was coming back and seemed unable to enjoy activities they had once loved. "I think they're just very attached to their routine," Sarah explained when the parents brought up their concerns. "Changes in schedule can be very disruptive for children this age. Perhaps we should limit weekend activities for a while until they feel more secure." The Andersons found themselves increasingly confused and uncertain. Sarah's explanations always sounded reasonable, and she'd had documentation for everything. She would show them photos of the twins laughing and playing during the day, yet their children seemed like different people when she wasn't around. Their pediatrician, during a routine checkup, noted that both twins had lost weight. When questioned, Sarah produced detailed food logs showing healthy, balanced meals and regular snacks. She suggested that perhaps the stress of their parents questioning their daily routine was affecting the children's appetites. "Children are very sensitive to changes in their emotional environment," she explained, her voice filled with concern. "Maybe we should focus on maintaining consistency and stability for a while, rather than introducing new worries." The Andersons felt trapped in a maze of explanations and justifications. Each time they raised a concern, Sarah would redirect their attention or provide such detailed, reasonable explanations that they began to doubt their own observations. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but they had no concrete evidence to support their growing unease. What they didn't know was that their instincts were right. Behind Sarah's perfect facade, a calculated plan was unfolding, and the worst was yet to come. The truth would eventually emerge, but not before their family endured even darker days ahead. The truth began to unravel on a Tuesday evening when David Anderson made an impulsive decision that would change everything. After another concerning phone call from Emma's preschool teacher about the child's withdrawn behavior, he stopped at an electronics store on his way home and purchased a small hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector. That night, after Sarah left and the twins were asleep, David installed the device in the playroom where the children spent most of their time. Jennifer watched nervously, torn between guilt over secretly recording their trusted babysitter and the growing knot of fear in her stomach about their children's well-being. "We're probably overreacting," Jennifer whispered as David tested the camera's feed on his phone, "but something just doesn't feel right anymore." The first day of recording showed nothing unusual, Sarah reading stories, organizing crafts, and supervising playtime, just as she had documented in her daily logs. But on the second day, around noon, everything changed. The footage showed Sarah preparing lunch for the twins as usual. But before serving their food, She pulled a small bottle from her purse and carefully added drops of clear liquid to both their cups of juice. Within an hour of eating, both Emma and Ethan became unusually drowsy and fell asleep on the playroom floor. What happened next made Jennifer physically ill as she watched the footage. Once the children were unconscious, Sarah made several phone calls. Soon, 3 strangers entered the house through the back door. They were young, probably in their early 20s, and carried backpacks and bottles of alcohol. The group made themselves at home, drinking and playing loud music while the drugged children slept nearby. Sarah occasionally checked on Emma and Ethan, adjusting their positions or covering them with blankets, acting as if drugging her charges was a normal part of her routine. "Look how peaceful they are," the camera caught Sarah saying to one of her friends. "A few drops of my special sleep medicine, and they're out for hours. The parents won't be home until 6. David's hands shook as he fast-forwarded through similar scenes from the next few days. The pattern was always the same: drugging the children's drinks, hosting small parties while they slept, then cleaning up just before the Andersons were due home. Some days, Sarah would leave the sleeping children alone in the house while she went out with her friends for hours. The most disturbing revelation came when they watched Sarah deliberately creating the bruises they had noticed. She would pinch the children's arms and legs while they were unconscious, then meticulously document false accidents in her daily log to explain the marks. "This explains everything," Jennifer said through tears. "The weight loss, the behavior changes, the nightmares. She's been drugging our babies and hurting them on purpose." The camera also captured Sarah's psychological manipulation of the twins when they were awake. She would whisper frightening stories about parents abandoning their children, then comfort them afterward, reinforcing their dependency on her. She taught them secret games that involved lying to their parents and threatened them with scary consequences if they ever told the truth. Unable to watch anymore, Jennifer called the police. Officers arrived within minutes and reviewed the footage. They advised the Andersons to act normally and continue sending the children to Sarah the next day while they built their case. That night was the longest of the Andersons' lives. They took turns holding their sleeping children, horrified by what had been happening under their own roof. Emma whimpered in her sleep, and Ethan called out, "No more medicine," in the midst of a nightmare. The next morning, Sarah arrived as usual, greeting the family with her practiced smile. She had no idea that police officers were waiting nearby, watching the house. She went through her normal routine, preparing drinks for the twins while Jennifer and David pretended to leave for work. But this time, before Sarah could give the children their special juice, police officers burst through the door. They caught her with the bottle of sedatives in her hand, the evidence irrefutable. As officers led her away in handcuffs, Sarah's calm facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," she screamed at the Andersons. "I took better care of them than you ever did. They love me more than you." The twins clung to their parents, crying in confusion and fear as their once trusted babysitter was taken away. The nightmare was over, but the process of healing was just beginning. The investigation into Sarah Miller's past revealed a pattern of deception that spanned multiple states and families. Detective Karen Martinez. "Sarah Miller isn't even her real name," Detective Martinez explained to the Andersons in her office, spreading out documents across her desk. "We've identified her as Rebecca Thorne. She's been using stolen identities and fake credentials for at least 5 years. The first victim family was discovered in Seattle, the Hamiltons, whom Sarah had claimed as references. In reality, they had never met her. She had simply used their name after reading about their family in a local newspaper. When contacted by police, Mrs. Hamilton was shocked to learn her family's information had been used to create fake reference letters. A deeper search revealed similar cases in San Francisco and Denver. In each city, Sarah, or Rebecca, had followed the same pattern. She would target affluent families with young children, create elaborate false credentials, and slowly gain control over the household. We found 3 more families who experienced similar abuse. Detective Martinez continued, showing the Andersons photographs of other children who had been victimized. The Thompson twins in San Francisco still require therapy 2 years later. The Martinez boy in Denver developed severe anxiety and trust issues. The police search of Sarah's apartment painted an even more chilling picture. Her bedroom walls were covered with photos of children she had cared for, arranged in a disturbing shrine-like display. Detailed journals documented her manipulation techniques, including recipes for various drug combinations she used to sedate children. She kept meticulous records of everything, explained the forensics expert who examined her computer. We found spreadsheets tracking each child's weight to calculate drug dosages, folders of forged documents, and even training videos she made for herself on how to appear more trustworthy to parents. More disturbing were the online messages between Sarah and a network of other abusive caregivers. They shared tips on grooming techniques, discussed which families to target, and exchanged information about sedative drugs that wouldn't be detected in routine medical tests. The investigation also uncovered financial crimes. Sarah had been stealing from each family, small amounts that wouldn't be immediately noticed. She had opened credit cards in the children's names, taking advantage of their clean credit histories to rack up thousands in debt. She was methodical, Detective Martinez said, showing the Andersons' bank statements and credit reports. She would make small purchases over time, nothing too obvious. By the time most families noticed anything missing, she had already moved on to her next victims. The police interviews with Sarah's party friends revealed another layer of exploitation. Many were college students who had no idea the children in the house were drugged. They thought Sarah was babysitting for family friends who knew about their gatherings. A few, however, were aware of her schemes and had participated in theft from the homes during these parties. Jennifer and David struggled to process each new revelation. They sat through hours of police interviews, providing details about their experience and helping to build the case against their former babysitter. The hardest part was learning how many warning signs they had missed or dismissed. "Don't blame yourselves," Detective Martinez assured them. She was a professional con artist who had perfected her act over years. Many other caring, attentive parents fell for her schemes. The investigation also revealed Sarah's background, a troubled childhood marked by foster homes and early encounters with the law. She had started her criminal career as a teenager, gradually refining her techniques and becoming more sophisticated in her deceptions. What shocked the investigators most was finding evidence of Sarah's next planned target family. She had already created a new false identity and begun gathering information about a family in Portland with triplets. Notes in her apartment detailed their daily routines, the layout of their home, and plans to make contact. She wasn't planning to stop, Detective Martinez explained grimly. Each time, her methods became more calculated, more controlling. The Andersons' discovery likely prevented several more families from becoming victims. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details emerged daily. The police had opened a hotline for potential victims, and the phones hadn't stopped ringing. Sarah's network of deception was proving to be larger than anyone had initially suspected, and the full scope of her crimes was still unfolding. The case was building, but for the Andersons and the other families, the nightmare wasn't over. The legal process was just beginning, and the road to healing would be long and challenging. The police investigation of Sarah Miller's apartment yielded even more disturbing evidence as forensic teams conducted a thorough search. Hidden behind a false wall in her closet, investigators discovered a makeshift laboratory where she had been mixing and preparing various sedatives. Among her possessions, police found a locked metal box containing prescription pads stolen from various medical offices, along with rubber stamps bearing different doctors' names. She had been forging prescriptions to obtain additional medications, carefully spreading her activities across different pharmacies to avoid detection. The most chilling discovery came when investigators accessed her laptop's hidden files. Sarah had maintained extensive dossiers on every child she had ever cared for, complete with photographs, medical information, and detailed notes about their fears and vulnerabilities. She had even recorded videos of the children while they were unconscious, documenting their reactions to different drug combinations. "What we're seeing here goes beyond simple abuse," Detective Martinez explained during a briefing. This was a calculated, scientific approach to exploiting children. She treated it like a research project. The evidence from her apartment also revealed an elaborate identity theft operation. Sarah had created multiple fake identities, each with its own complete set of credentials, driver's licenses, social security cards, and professional certifications. She had even established credit histories for these false personas, making them almost impossible to distinguish from legitimate identities. During questioning, one of Sarah's party friends, a college student named Tyler, broke down and provided crucial information. He revealed that Sarah had bragged about having connections to a larger criminal network that trafficked in stolen identities and prescription drugs. She said she could get anything we wanted, Tyler testified, his voice shaking. She talked about having friends in medical offices, government agencies, even law enforcement. We thought she was just bragging, but now I'm not so sure. The investigation expanded to include federal agencies as the scope of Sarah's crimes became clear. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit joined the case, linking Sarah to similar incidents in other states under different aliases. We've identified at least 7 different identities she used over the past decade, FBI agent Rachel Thompson reported. Each one was crafted with extraordinary attention to detail. She even created fake social media histories going back years for each persona. The search of her storage unit revealed boxes of children's belongings, small items stolen from each family she had worked for. These weren't valuable pieces, but rather personal mementos. Favorite toys, baby books, family photos. Each item was carefully labeled with the child's name and date of acquisition, like trophies from her victims. Jennifer Anderson had to identify items belonging to her twins. She took Emma's first baby tooth. Jennifer sobbed, holding the tiny tooth box she had thought was lost. And Ethan's favorite stuffed dinosaur that we spent weeks looking for. She was collecting pieces of their childhood like souvenirs. The investigation also uncovered a series of encrypted emails between Sarah and unknown correspondents, discussing various aspects of child psychology and behavior modification. She had been sharing her research with others, offering advice on how to manipulate both children and parents effectively. It's like she was running her own twisted educational program, Detective Martinez observed, teaching others how to replicate her methods of control and abuse. Medical examinations of her former charges revealed the long-term effects of her actions. Many children showed signs of prolonged drug exposure, with some experiencing ongoing health issues. The psychological impact was even more severe, with many victims requiring intensive therapy. Dr. Lisa Wong, a child psychologist working with the victims, explained the complexity of the damage. These children were subjected to a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation. She didn't just abuse them physically, she rewrote their understanding of trust and safety at a fundamental level. As the evidence mounted, prosecutors began building what they believed would be an airtight case. Sarah's methodical record-keeping, initially meant to perfect her crimes, would now serve as the foundation for her prosecution. The investigation was far from over, but one thing had become clear. Sarah Miller wasn't just a fraudulent babysitter. She was a calculating predator who had turned childcare into a science of exploitation. The full impact of her crimes was still emerging, and investigators worried that they had only scratched the surface of her activities. The trial of Sarah Miller began on a cold morning in January, drawing national media attention. The courthouse was packed with affected families, law enforcement officials, and journalists, all eager to witness the proceedings against one of the most methodical child abusers in recent history. As the trial progressed, 5 additional families came forward with stories mirroring the Andersons' experience. Each testimony revealed the same pattern. Sarah would gain their trust, isolate their children, and systematically abuse her position while maintaining a perfect facade of professional childcare. The most powerful testimony came from 8-year-old Lucy Thompson, one of Sarah's earliest victims. Now 2 years older and supported by her therapist, Lucy bravely took the stand to describe her experiences. She told me I was her special friend, Lucy testified, her voice barely above a whisper. But if I was really special, I had to keep our games secret. She said my parents wouldn't love me anymore if they knew about the special juice and the sleeping times. Medical experts presented evidence of the long-term effects of Sarah's drug cocktails on her victims. Dr. James Chen, a pediatric toxicologist, explained how she had carefully calculated doses to keep children compliant without raising obvious medical concerns. These combinations of medications, while not immediately lethal, could have caused severe organ damage over time, Dr. Chen testified. It's remarkable that none of the children suffered fatal complications. Sarah maintained her composure throughout most of the trial, sitting quietly and taking notes. However, her calm demeanor cracked during the testimony of Emma Anderson. The young girl, speaking via closed-circuit television, described the dark games and secret medicine that still haunted her nightmares. I didn't want to drink it, Emma said, clutching her mother's hand off camera. But Sarah said monsters would come if I didn't take my special juice. She said only she could keep us safe from them. The prosecution presented Sarah's journals as evidence, reading entries that detailed her methodical approach to breaking down children's resistance and manipulating their parents. Her writings revealed a disturbing pride in her methods, referring to her victims as research subjects and their homes as laboratories. During cross-examination, Sarah's defense attorney attempted to portray her as a victim of her own traumatic childhood, bringing in experts to testify about her history in the foster care system. However, this strategy backfired when prosecutors revealed journal entries where Sarah mocked parents for believing her fabricated background stories. The most damaging evidence came from Sarah's own video recordings. The jury watched in horror as footage showed her calmly documenting the effects of different drug combinations on unconscious children, speaking in a clinical tone about their reactions and recovery times. Subject shows increased lethargy with Formula B. Her voice narrated over footage of a drugged child. Onset time approximately 15 minutes. Parents continue to attribute drowsiness to normal childhood fatigue. On the trial's 10th day, one of Sarah's former associates, Michelle Parker, testified about their network of child abusers. She described online forums where they shared techniques and warned each other about suspicious parents or potential investigations. Sarah was considered an expert. Michelle testified as part of her plea deal. Others would ask her advice about how to avoid detection, how to manipulate children more effectively. She enjoyed her reputation in the community. The defense's case crumbled when their psychiatric expert withdrew after reviewing Sarah's complete journals. The expert later admitted that the writings showed not mental illness, but calculated, deliberate exploitation. As the trial neared its end, Sarah finally took the stand in her own defense. Her testimony was chilling in its lack of remorse. She spoke about her actions as if describing a scientific study, referring to her abuse as necessary research into child psychology and behavior modification. "I provided a valuable service," she stated coldly when questioned about drugging children. "Parents want quiet, well-behaved children. I simply developed efficient methods to meet that demand." The jury took less than 4 hours to reach their verdict. As the forewoman stood to deliver their decision, Sarah's facade finally shattered completely. For the first time, her victims and their families saw the true face of the woman who had caused them so much pain. The verdict would bring some closure to the families, but the impact of Sarah Miller's crimes would continue to ripple through their lives. The final chapter of this nightmare was about to unfold in the sentencing phase, where justice would finally be served. The sentencing hearing for Sarah Miller took place on a rainy Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed with families, each carrying the weight of their experiences with the woman who had betrayed their trust in the most devastating way possible. Judge Caroline Roberts, known for her thorough approach to high-profile cases, began the proceedings by reviewing the jury's guilty verdicts on all 28 counts, including child endangerment. Jennifer Anderson was the first to speak, her voice steady despite her tears. "Our twins still wake up screaming some nights. Emma won't drink from any cup that isn't completely clear, terrified of special juice. Ethan flinches when anyone reaches to touch him unexpectedly. These aren't just behaviors they'll outgrow. These are deep wounds that may never fully heal." One by one, parents approached the podium, sharing stories of their children's ongoing struggles. They spoke of trust issues, anxiety, developmental delays, and the countless hours of therapy their families now required. Some children had developed eating disorders, while others struggled with severe separation anxiety. Dr. Lisa Wam, the child psychologist who had worked with many of the victims, presented her professional assessment. "The damage inflicted by Sarah Miller goes beyond typical abuse cases. She systematically destroyed these children's basic sense of safety and trust during their most formative years. The psychological impact is comparable to what we see in survivors of long-term hostage situations." When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood without showing any sign of remorse. Her statement shocked even her own defense team. "I don't expect you to understand the importance of my work," she said, addressing the judge. "Every experiment requires sacrifice. These children were part of something larger than themselves." The prosecutor's final statement was brief but powerful. "Your Honor, we're not just dealing with multiple counts of abuse. We're facing someone who turned childcare into a laboratory for cruelty. The defendant shows no remorse and, more disturbingly, still believes her actions were justified. Judge Roberts took 30 minutes to review her notes before delivering the sentence. When she returned, the courtroom fell silent. "Sarah Miller," she began, "your crimes represent the worst betrayal of trust this court has ever seen. You didn't just abuse these children. You conducted a calculated campaign of terror against innocent families who trusted you with their most precious responsibility." The judge continued, "Beyond the physical abuse, you created psychological trauma that these families will spend years, perhaps decades, trying to overcome. Your actions were not just criminal, they were evil in their methodical execution." The sentence was announced: 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by lifetime supervision. Additionally, Sarah would be required to pay restitution to each family and would be permanently banned from any work involving children or vulnerable adults. As the sentence was read, Sarah finally showed emotion, not remorse, but anger. "You're interrupting important research," she shouted as officers moved to take her away. "You don't understand what I was trying to accomplish." The Andersons watched as Sarah was led away in handcuffs, feeling a complex mix of relief and lingering pain. Their case had helped expose a larger network of abuse, leading to ongoing investigations across multiple states. In the weeks following the sentencing, support groups formed among the affected families. They shared resources, therapy recommendations, and the common understanding that recovery would be a long journey. The case led to significant changes in child care legislation. The Miller Act was passed in several states, requiring more rigorous background checks and monitoring systems for child care workers. The FBI established a special task force to investigate similar networks of abuse. 1 year after the sentencing, the Andersons participated in a conference for families affected by child care abuse. Emma and Ethan, now in intensive therapy, were slowly showing signs of healing. They had started to trust their new babysitter, carefully chosen and thoroughly vetted. "We'll never be the same," David Anderson shared with other parents. "But we're learning to trust again, one day at a time. Our children's resilience gives us hope." The story of Sarah Miller became a cautionary tale in childcare circles, a reminder that trust must be balanced with vigilance. While the legal case was closed, the impact of her crimes continued to influence child protection policies and family support services across the country. The shadow she had cast over so many young lives would eventually fade, but the lessons learned from this case would remain, helping to protect future generations of children from similar predators.